Hello, comrades. Welcome to the Communist Forum. We've got two sections tonight. We're starting with Jack Conrad, who's going to give the political report of the Provisional Central Committee, talk about Greenland, Trump's third term, Iran, Yemen, and perhaps he promises might get to the SWP and just stop oil, but we might not, because we have a second part, and that's Mike McNair giving an update on the communist fusion process. In any case, we'll have time for questions and discussion and debate afterwards. So the reports are going to last about an hour, and then we're opening up for comments and questions from the floor. Over to you, Jack.
Okay, thanks, Tina. Well, I'm going to start very briefly with Greenland. We all know J.D. Vance and a little posse has gone off to Greenland, not to the capital, but to some American base, which is way up, north. And the message seems to be changing. Now, whether this is J.D. Vance or the administration as a whole, I don't know. We do know that Trump is a very mercurial figure. They can agree that J.D. Vance will go to Greenland and say X, Y, and Z. And then when he comes back, Trump is quite capable of denouncing him or calling him a fool or something like that. But the message seems to be now that Greenland should go for independence. Now, that seems to be a general consensus in Greenland. The real question is the pace that they go towards independence. And all you need to consider is, of course, that there are some 57,000 Greenlanders. So although it's an enormous piece of territory, when it comes to its economy, when it comes to, I don't know, tax revenue, we're not talking about something that has a sort of fully rounded state capacity. So what is being proposed now by JD is that Greenland goes for independence, one would presume quickly, and then establish what he calls a partnership with the United States. I don't think anyone is suggesting that Greenland is given the status of an actual state in the United States. So maybe it will have the status, if it happens, of a Puerto Rico or some other US territory. The same can be argued, actually, and has been argued about Canada. There's 40 million Canadians as opposed to 57,000 Greenlanders. And one of the arguments is that if you have Canada in either as a whole or in bits, it will vote the wrong way. It won't vote Republican. And obviously, if you look at the US system, at least, over recent decades, things have been very finely balanced between Democrats and Republicans, who controls the House, who controls appointments to the Supreme Court. All things have been very balanced. So precisely having 40 million Canadians in on some equal basis, that's another question. Who knows, on the other hand, what actually Trump and the administration have in mind, other than a greater America. And it should be added, by the way, that if we're looking at Greenland itself, there's been an agreement with Denmark, obviously, not Greenland, but Denmark, since 1951, that the United States can station as many troops as it wants on the territory of Greenland. So it's got at present time a number of bases. Historically, they've been associated with early warning systems in terms of intercontinental ballistic missiles, which would be fired over the Arctic. So they're there to give an early warning. But clearly, the United States has the ability to put in as many troops, Air Force personnel, Navy personnel, as it chooses under existing circumstances. Just thought I would flag it. I have referred to it before. This time I've just read for my sins the Daily Mail, so I'm not putting it forward as right on reliable journalism. But this is something that Trump himself has been speculating about, and that is, why not a third term? And of course, the answer to that is the 22nd Amendment. That was passed, I think, in 1951. This is in response to Roosevelt, who was elected how many times? 4 times. Either way, he, of course, died, midterm. Either way, afterwards, they passed this constitutional amendment barring anyone being elected who'd already served 2 terms. So the point about it is that if you at least believe the Daily Mail article, and I'm not dismissing it, there were a number of different drafts being presented about this 22nd Amendment. And one of them made it absolutely explicitly clear that if you'd been president twice before, that was it. You could not become president. And so the word elected matters here. Again, just going by the Daily Mail article, which is presumably relying on some other series of journalistic efforts, various presidents, including Eisenhower, but also Ronald Reagan, looked into the possibility of a third term, and they were told, look, there's a loophole. And the loophole is basically that you could run on a joint ticket, for example, with someone called J.D. Vance. He was your presidential candidate. You could run as vice presidential candidate. He puts his hand on the Bible, swears to obey the Constitution, and is declared president. He then resigns, and as everyone knows, that would make the vice president the president. So not quite the same as Putin and Medvedev, but nonetheless along those lines. Now, the problem, of course, is that Trump is no spring chicken. And, looking at him now, I don't buy in, and I've never bought into the Democrat narrative. Remember with once they got rid of Biden and they went with Harris, suddenly it was Trump that was losing his marbles. Suddenly it was Trump was the one that couldn't cope with the pace. I don't really see much evidence of that myself, but clearly time will matter. And what Trump looks like today isn't going to be the same Trump in 2-3 years' time. And imagine him precisely in a third term. Either way, I don't think we should automatically dismiss that possibility. After all, if we look at Greenland, if we look at Canada, if we look at the talk about taking back control of the Panama Canal, basically what Trump is doing is ripping up the norms, not of the history of the United States, but the recent history of the United States. Hence, the 22nd Amendment, hence, NATO, mutual defense of fellow NATO powers. Okay, we know that the United States gave itself plenty of wriggle room, but nonetheless, a rules-based order. Trump is basically rejecting that, and we shouldn't take that as impossible. In the same way, it's understandable when comrades on the left first heard about the the Gaza plan, the Riviera of the Middle East. It's understandable to laugh at it because, American troops are going to be based there. Is America really going to take over a bit of real estate, in what I call Greater Israel? Yeah, it's risible. But of course, the reality was that behind it was green lighting, legitimizing ethnic cleansing. And of course, that's why when it was announced, you had Netanyahu standing next to him. And of course, he was beaming, he was smiling because he understood obviously what it was about. And that is a step towards the realization of the Zionist dream of an Israel purged of Palestinians and a greater Israel. Okay. Iran. Friday, we saw more bombing of Yemen. And of course, the significance of that isn't just the United States flexing its power in the Red Sea, because what the United States has been saying is if there's any Houthi retaliation against shipping in the Red Sea, then it will be Iran that will be punished. That is important. So the United States is treating the Houthis as proxies and is basically saying to Iran that if they do anything that we don't like, then we hold you responsible. Now, we don't know, at least I don't know, what is really afoot here. There's all sorts of dreadful threats being made. We know now all about Trump's letter that was sent to the Supreme Leader, that while it was couched in extremely polite language, it contained a pretty chilling threat that if you don't abide, if you don't, enter into negotiations to get rid of your nuclear weapons capability, then to use a phrase, all hell will be unleashed upon you. In the same way, we've had a reply to Trump's letter, but also from other elements of the regime, including the foreign minister, and also including the Speaker of the Parliament. So, for example, the Speaker of the Parliament talks about if the United States attacks us, we will strike against American bases and American allies. Who knows, whether the United States actually has plans. I'm not talking about plans in terms of war game plans, but actually is intent on attacking Iran, or whether it's strong arming it into negotiations, as far as I can see it, into some sort of negotiations that actually mirror quite closely the 2015 nuclear deal that Trump tore up when he came in, called it the worst deal of the century, or whatever the particular phrase was. Either way, yes, threats have been issued on both sides. I take the American threats, I have to say, a lot more seriously. It's a lot more capable militarily than Iran is. And we've seen Iran in action, not only in terms of Israel and drones, but more importantly, I would suggest Israel and ballistic missiles. And Iran, in the form of the Speaker of the Parliament, is saying we would strike, as I said, American bases and American allies. Well, America is going to be as capable, if not more capable, than Israel in striking down drones. That should be pretty simple, but also ballistic missiles. Now, some might get through. Nonetheless, what the United States could deliver on Iran will be many, many, many times more destructive. That's presuming that it's going for some sort of heavy blow as opposed to a demonstration. And I really don't see the point in the United States demonstrating its power in some sort of token fashion, that wouldn't be to demonstrate its power. We've seen Israel, play more of that role than anything else. Just a last point on Iran in this respect. Iran insists that its nuclear program is a civilian program. Clearly, that's not true, because what it's done, it's enriched uranium up to the level of nuclear grade. Now, that doesn't mean it's got nuclear weapons. It certainly hasn't got nuclear weapons, but it's got the capability of going from where it is at the moment to nuclear weapons in a very short time. And it's held back deliberately in that ambiguous situation of where it's got the uranium up to weapons level and a lot of it, it's got the missiles, it simply hasn't put the two together. How long that would take, I don't know. But the threat is that this could be done very quickly. How long's very quickly? How long's a piece of string? Okay, talking, I suppose, at the level of horror and fear about what could happen in the very short term in the Middle East, we go more to the level of farce. And that's with this signal gate. Everything is called signal nowadays, isn't it? God help us. Either way, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about this communication between leading members of the Trump administration live as the US is hitting targets in the Yemen and commenting on it. And of course, what the scandal isn't that they were sitting there like, boys playing a war game. That seems to be about the level that they're discussing what's going on with Yemen. But the fact that accidentally Pete Hesketh invited in editor-in-chief, one of the editors anyway, of The Atlantic onto this call. And we've had all sorts of silly stories about it's not true, or he's just making it up. It's so obvious that he's not making it up. I haven't read the whole story. I've just read bits of the transcript that he reproduced about what they were saying as these planes, F-18s and Tomahawk missiles were slamming in on targets in Yemen. The idea, and I understand why the Democrats and why pro-Democrat voices, are making hay of this. It's certainly true that if someone in the CIA or in the military had done such a thing, they would be sacked. I have no doubt on that score. But the reality is that if, for example, they had invited a leading figure from the Houthis in on the call, or if they'd invited someone from the Russian regime in on the call, it would have made no difference. These were people not directing the military operation. These were people commenting on the reports by the military of the military operation. So, for example, you have comments, we've had the first strike. The second wave is now going in. Nonetheless, it also does reveal, surely, the inexperience of these individuals when it comes to the actual state machine itself. These people are used to talking on television. They're used to US government at a state level, not at a United States level. They're not used to being, in the inner core of the state. That is certainly true. So, yeah, the idea that Jeffrey Goldberg was lying or something like that is clearly nonsense. No, it doesn't look like Trump is going to sack these people, but he is quite capable of doing that for perhaps completely different reasons. 20. Quick comment on Rachel Reeves. I don't know. I don't know about you, comrades. It wouldn't have surprised me. I'm not saying I would have expected it, but it wouldn't have surprised me for Rachel Reeves to have turned round and said, look, since the general election with our manifesto, the facts have changed. And because the facts have changed, we've got to change our approach when it comes to taxes. We've got to change our approach when it comes to borrowing. Look at Trump and, tariffs being imposed left, right, and center. Look at what's going on in Ukraine. Under these circumstances, if the facts change, as Keynes said, we've got to change our policy. That wouldn't have surprised me. Instead, what we get from the Chancellor is that things have changed, but I'm not for changing. Now, of course, I'm not accusing her of being naive or, having some fixation that's irrational. She is aware, I'm certainly aware of the danger of a country like Britain extending its borrowing and basically suffering some sort of Liz Truss moment. Certainly, if you extend borrowing, you would expect interest rates to rise. And the British government, as we all know, spends a fortune paying off its interest rate. So I think it's something like £1 trillion, isn't it? Roughly speaking, maybe £1 trillion and 100 billion revenue comes into the government, but something like 100 billion goes out in interest payments. And that's why the Labour government, when it came in, said everything depends on growth. If you can grow the economy, tax revenues increase. If the economy is growing, the markets will be pleased. Interest rate should nudge down. So what you repay goes down. Your ability to pay off the debt goes up. But of course, what's happened is not just Ukraine. It's not just tariffs from the United States. We've had Britain's predicted growth rate halved. So we've gone from predictions roughly, this is very crude, but from 2%, which is not much to, not much to write home about, to something like 1%. So Britain is expected to grow, but almost at a statistically, marginal level. Either way, she didn't change her basic approach. She stuck with that. And as a result, what we've had is further welfare cuts. We've had the promise of increasing so-called defense spending. So what gives welfare? It's worthwhile just saying again, we don't buy into the slogan, tax the rich. The fact of the matter is, if you take Britain, I don't know what the statistics are, but I think it's something like 20% of the revenue that I referred to that comes into the government. It could be higher, all things considered, but it's something like 20% of it comes in from the City of London, from finance. And of course, the fact of the matter is, if you start taxing that, one thing we all know about finance is that it's highly mobile. And, what comes in to the City of London, which is basically a giant, offshore tax haven, can very easily be transferred to, I don't know, New York or Frankfurt or Paris or somewhere else. And of course, what we've seen in the recent period is a whole number of different companies doing that in terms of where they actually base themselves. So in that sense, it makes Britain very vulnerable to flight of capital. So Rachel Reeves isn't an idiot when she resists the slogan, tax the rich, or as the War on Want says, tax the ultra rich. The fact of the matter is what goes for capital also goes for the ultra rich. They tend to be carriers of multiple passports. So they might be living in Highgate or Kensington or Hampstead, but they can easily move to their mansion in Paris, or move to one of their properties in California or wherever. They are mobile too. Either way, we certainly say the idea that defense spending, arms spending, that this doesn't come from welfare cuts. It's got nothing to do with welfare cuts. This is just a con. And the reality is that, of course, budgets aren't neatly allocated. What we're talking about is total government spending, and this government is committed to increasing arms spending, not just in terms as a percentage of government revenue, but in terms of British GDP. And we have the figure, don't we, of going up from 2% to 2.5%, maybe more. So Rachel Reeves's room for maneuver, we need to recognize that, is very limited. And that's not to excuse her, not to say don't protest. We should protest. But we must recognize that the British government does have limited room for maneuver. And what we need to be pushing is not what makes sense for, UK PLC. What we need to be pushing is what makes sense for the political economy of the working class. And therefore, what we put forward isn't a nationalist perspective. What we put forward is, what does the working class need in terms of its living standards, its level of culture? What internationalist duties do we have to the world's working class? That's where our loyalties lie. Okay, 1:30-ish. What to choose next? I suppose I'll finish just by touching on an article in Socialist Worker. I'm going to leave Just Say No to Oil. We've got Just Stop Oil. We've got an article coming on that question in the forthcoming issue of the paper. But yeah, I'll finish with an article by Thomas Tegley Evans. He's the new editor of Socialist Worker, and it follows really from the last item, and that is the Rachel Reeves budget. And what he's calling for is people not to fight, but to leave the Labour Party. And he quite rightly says that what we need to do isn't just to leave the Labour Party. What we need to do is break with Laborism. Now, we don't put forward any sort of organisational fetish about leaving the Labour Party. Actually, we would urge people to stay in the Labour Party. We would urge them to fight in the Labour Party. And if people like John McDonnell and other members of the Socialist Campaign Group then get expelled from the Labour Party, so be it. And that applies not only in the parliamentary Labour Party, that would apply locally in your constituency Labour Party as well. So we would issue the slogan, stay in and fight, don't quit. But yes, the idea that we should break with Laborism, that is absolutely correct. The giveaway, though, in the Comrade's article is where he looks at election work and basically says this isn't really important, that Laborism is defined by compromise brought on by the left needing to be in unity with the right, and the right sets the agenda because it has to be credible. I would argue not in front of the electorate, but in front of an electorate that is shaped and influenced and constantly molded and remolded by the mainstream media, not least the so-called heritage media, the Daily Mirror, the Mail, the Sun, Times, Telegraph, note that the capitalists who own these often make a loss. They value the influence that these mouthpieces give them. Either way, Comrade Thomas talks about the real struggle of the working class. And he says the real struggle of the working class isn't about elections, isn't about parliament. The real struggle lies elsewhere. Now, I disagree with that. Of course, the working class struggles around wages, it struggles around benefits that are being cut. Of course it does. It also manifests its strength through mass demonstrations. Yes, it does. But it also can manifest its strength and build its strength precisely by registering the number of votes and indeed the number of representatives it gets elected. So, for example, in Germany in the 19th century, social democracy became a state within a state, not least through its success in contesting elections that were grossly unequal, grossly unfair, but nonetheless it was able to build a mass organization, and its press, its branches, its clubs, its institutions were built in parallel with its growing electoral power. And that was true also in the Russian Revolution, again under circumstances far more difficult than we have in Britain. For example, the Bolsheviks couldn't run under the name of RSDLP until after the fall of Tsarism, had to run under the names of individuals, or consistent Democrats was one name that they had to use. But yes, the Bolsheviks were highly successful in using the limited franchise, male-only votes, different electoral constituencies for different classes, but it ended up dominating the electoral college of the working class. It won all the working class representatives for the Tsar's Duma. So we don't counterpose electoral work to strikes or demonstrations, circulation of the press. And I do detect, Comrade Thomas, a slight hypocrisy or lack of knowledge about the history of your own organization, and I find that inexcusable. What sort of politics did Maxine Blower stand on up in Sheffield in the general election last year? Were these the politics of a revolutionary organization? Yes, she raised the question of Palestine, but a lot of Labour politicians, and certainly a lot of ex-Labour politicians who are still dominated by what we can call Laborism, also raised the exact same slogans. And don't you remember your own history when you did start to stand, after a long gap under the name of the Socialist Alliance, how you actually, because you were the dominant force in it, how you ensured that democratic issues were completely sidelined in its manifesto, and how that organization, in the words of leaders of the SWP, wanted to fashion it into, this is old Labour, as against the Blairites. That was something that the SWP was responsible for. And have you forgotten Respect, which wasn't just putting itself forward as old Labour, but was putting itself forward as a popular front of the sort that the old CPGB in the 1930s would have advanced. In the 1930s, it had an alliance with the Dean of Canterbury, the Duchess of Atholl, if I remember, Michael Redgrave, the father of Corinne and Vanessa, and all sorts of liberals and do-gooders. You had exactly that arrangement because of your politics. So yes, we are in favour of breaking with Laborism, but we are in favour of, when you stand for elections, standing as revolutionaries. And that means standing as revolutionaries who are, yes, consistent Democrats, extreme Democrats who put forward the politics of what we can gain that's necessary to make the working class, the ruling class, what we can do to build an organization, a state in a state that readies us to take power. And I note, I'll finish with this, that Socialist Worker has recently changed its what we stand for column, and it includes the question of a workers' militia. But it includes the question of a workers' militia after the revolution. So it says a socialist state will exist alongside workers' councils and a workers' militia. What about now? How do you get to a workers' state? How do you get there? We raise, along with German social democracy, Russian social democracy, the Communist Manifesto, the first Labour manifesto in Britain, we raised the question of a citizens' militia, a people's militia, something that was strongly recommended by Frederick Engels in his pamphlet, Can Europe Disarm? Why didn't Maxine Blower stand for that? Why didn't Respect stand for that? Why did Respect reject that slogan? Why did the SWP reject that demand when it came to the Socialist Alliance? I would humbly suggest that you haven't broken from Laborism, that when you stand for elections, precisely that is what limits and that's what shapes your politics. So we agree, break with Laborism. That not only includes comrades in the Labour Party, but it also includes comrades at the top of Socialist Workers' Party. And I say that in a comradely way. Break, comrades, from Laborism. I'll finish there. Thank you, Tina.
Thanks, Jack. I understand there was an article in preparation for yesterday's Summit of Resistance organized by We Demand Change, where they were talking a lot about standing in the elections. So I suspect with Collective not getting its finger out, that might be the new form that this electoral front of the left will take. Okay, second part now is Mike McNair with an update on the communist fusion process.
Okay, we had a short meeting earlier this morning. Two comrades from talking about socialism, one comrade from Prometheus, because Comrade Cat Rylance had to give apologies due to illness, and two comrades from CPGB, and Comrade Yasemin in attendance taking minutes from CPGB. And what we were discussing was the CPGB's view that we need a minimum program. And Jack introduced basically why we approach it in the same way as the classical social democracy. We have some immediate economic demands. We distinguish ourselves on this front from the trade unionist or workplace approach, or from the idea that all you need to do is struggle for immediate insurrection and overthrow of the state. Rather, we need to, under capitalism, to prepare the working class for its future role as a ruling class, not just as a class which fights for its sectional interests while accepting the overall rule of capital, but the working class offering ways of leading the whole society. And that means in particular focusing on the constitutional order, but also talking about foreign policy. And our actual minimum demands are about strengthening the position of the working class, the economic minimum demands, and about defining it in terms of the working class having some sort of life under capitalism. So we're not, in that sense, concerned just to say pie in the sky in the distant future, but what can we fight for in the present? And it's secondly, we're not just concerned with the interests of the working class as a class, but also with the working class as a class proposing solutions to the problems of the middle classes uh, um, in the hope of neutralizing or winning over sections of them. Now, Comrade, Comrade Tom from um, uh, uh, had a couple of fairly short points, one of which was about um, the questions of what we have in and what we don't have in, particularly in relation to democratic demands. And he made the point, which I think Jack and I both agree with, that it's extraordinarily easy to look at this draft program of CPGP and think, well, but we ought to add this, and we ought to add that, and we ought to add the other. And then at the same time, also, on the other hand, everybody who's been in these discussions have agreed that if we can, we want to make it shorter. We want to make it short as possible, as long as necessary. And a second point of Comrade Tom's, no, I'm going to put that second one on one side. So the second then is we've got from the TAS comrades, there is a substantive disagreement. And the nature of this substantive disagreement, we need to work further on. And we agreed at the end of the meeting that we're going to continue this discussion at the next meeting and probably carrying on considerably further. The TAS comrades are uncertain what we mean by the minimum program. They think that the terminology of minimum program and maximum program is confusing and unhelpful, and that it's more important to approach it on the question of what does the Communist Party stand for? And in that context, the argument is that we can't say that we've won democracy unless we've won democracy in not only in the state but also in the workplace. And in that context, therefore, the question, as far as I understand, is not entirely clear, but the question of generalized expropriation of capital is on the absolutely immediate agenda. That was Comrade Nick arguing. And in terms of the what we have in the minimum program, rather than having a long, elaborate list of demands, which Comrade Nick made the point that because we're a very small group, these look as though they're plucked out of thin air. Has to be said that that's actually just as much true, if not a fortiori true, for two of the program of the French Parti Ouvrier, which was written by Guest and Lassalle with the assistance of Karl Marx in Frederick Engels' front row. Um, and the converse of it, we spent quite considerable amounts of time in the 1990s and in 2008, 2011 on the redrafting of the program, and we had drawn to a very considerable extent on demands and issues which were already raised in the movement. However, on the other hand, the argument is that rather than having a defined minimum program, we should say communists will fight for every improvement that can be forced or wrested from the capitalist class against their wishes. Comrade Ed, also from TAS, the same basic issue. We should expect that if the political strength of the working class is increasing, that also implies an increase in the economic strength of the working class. And we should expect that the class itself, on taking political power, would be led to immediate actions of expropriations, not only against big capital, but also against small capital, and we shouldn't be thinking, the comrades argue, in terms of a substantial or significant period of transition between the taking of political power on the one hand and the socialization of the economy as a whole on the other hand. Comrade Jack and I responded to these arguments. Our understanding of the minimum program is it's called a minimum program precisely because we're not prepared to enter into government without an agreement to implement the minimum program. Where that's difficult to be certain of, because actually the first usage of it is very casual usage by Karl Marx in 1881. But that seems to be the general principle. It's opposing the phenomenon of the far left, of the left, more from in 1848, but also actually on several times since, entering into government as a minority and in consequence discrediting itself politically. And we need to discuss and think about the question of class structure. How far is it really the case that all the forces of production are socialized to the point that the working class is the guys who are doing the work and can immediately lay hands on it, as opposed to there being a substantial amount of activity which is done by small businesses and family farmers and stuff like that. Equally, question about there's back in 1919, Nikolai Bukharin proposed the abolition of the minimum program, and Lenin argued that it would be wrong to abolish the minimum program even in 1919, because although the Russian Communist Party was in power, it was nonetheless the case that we could be thrown back into the situation of having to fight under capitalism, and therefore having to fight for political democracy and for workers' power and for minimum demands under capitalism. And in this context, our view is, yes, we want a transition to take place as quickly as possible, but the circumstances under which the transition takes place, the circumstances under which power is obtained, it's difficult to tell. It's certainly not the case. It is as illusory to have socialist construction in Britain as it would be to have socialist construction in Somerset without the rest of Britain being involved. The reality is that socialist construction in Britain would be starved out with extraordinary speed by US orchestrated and EU orchestrated sanctions, and indeed even much less ambitious projects like those of Syriza. As soon as the comrades enter into government and they get briefed by the civil servants, and civil servants say to them, look, if you stand off the troika, the country will just be made bankrupt and everybody will starve, because Greece hasn't been self-sufficient in food for 2,500 years. The same is true of Britain. Not that it's been self-sufficient in food for much. It was self-sufficient in food until approximately 1800, but it hasn't been self-sufficient in food since 1800. And as of present, 45% of the food that's eaten in this country is imported. The distribution systems run on petrol, which is imported, etc., etc., etc. And in fact, as Jack said in relation to the tax the rich slogan, the reality is this country is an offshore centre with a moderately sized real economy attached to it, and the moderately sized real economy could not feed itself. So that then we have to think about fighting under capitalism until we're in a position to take power in Europe as a continent. Tom, I think, making the point, two sides. The first is that he was in agreement that there was some sort of period of transition, though whether he would agree with us CPGP comrades on the nature of the period of transition is another question. Second, which I thought was a good point, is that we, CPGB, in the draft programme, we do talk about workers' control demands. You know, we have workers' control demands in immediate demands. And I can point to I not immediately before my time, back when I was working at the Cowley car plant, the guys before my time, people on the line told me it used to be the case that if a foreman interfered with a car going down the line, then nobody would touch that car for the rest of the way down the line. It would come off and go to the rectification without any wheels, engine, blah, 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 blah. That's what can be achieved. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but it's an illustration of what can be achieved in terms of workers' controlled demands under capitalism, degrees of control, and that process of workers' control actions, without it necessarily being the case that the firm had been expropriated. That's something which we need to think about immediately. Nonetheless, it was clear that this is a substantial issue of difference, and that we are going to have to just continue discussing it. It's also desirable for us to continue discussing it in a literary way, and I think Comrade Ed said that he was going to write something on it. I'm certainly going to try and write something on it when I have time, which I haven't at the moment. Finally, we discussed the co-sponsorship, co-organisation, co-hosting of Communist University in July, August. Both TAS have agreed, and also the Prometheus editorial board, not only the people who are involved in these FCU discussions, but the editorial board as a whole are also agreed. So we're sort of go for Communist University in July, August, and hopefully it'll be a big, interesting. We'll also have the opportunity to talk about both the strengths of the common elements of the project and also the political differences involved at that here. So that's good news. And the discussion, I think it was a friendly and constructive discussion. It's not where there's clearly a very important substantive difference, but exactly how that works out is yet to be seen. That's it.
Keeping us on our toes. Thank you, Mike. Interesting reports and interesting political report there. Comrades, if you have any questions, comments, contributions, please click raise hand and I can bring you in to speak. There's been a bit of a discussion in the chat. Jack, I wonder if you've seen this and might want to pick it up because nobody's got their hand up at the moment, which concerns you seem to be very worried about balancing the books of the nation state or something along those lines. And, that shouldn't be our program. We should tax the rich, etc., and not think about rich people running away. Why do we take that seriously? Could you maybe expand on this a little bit?
Well, I actually thought, if I didn't say it, it was going on in my head. I actually said we shouldn't get ourselves into any worry about Britain, UK, PLC. All right. So I'll say it again. Our concern is not Great Britain as a nation state, Great Britain as a capitalist state. Our concern is the working class and what it needs. And that's our starting point. All I'm saying is if you raise the slogan, if you think it's as easy as to, you just raise the slogan, tax the rich. Basically, that's, I would argue anyway, I would say that it leads you to a reformist conclusion. All you need to do, because there's loads of rich people here, up the tax rate, we can get loads of benefit, and everything's fine, isn't it? Except I'm arguing that if that happened, and it could happen, a government could be forced into, demonstrating its popularity or its responsiveness by taking such a course, you will find yourself in a situation that capital leaves Britain. That's all I'm arguing. So I'm arguing that there is no easy way out. So yes, the working class movement needs to fight for decent, proper benefits. It needs to fight for proper, decent wages. And if the system has to go in order to meet that, then the system has to go. And that's what I would be arguing. Yeah.
Okay, I wonder if any of the comrades who were so enraged in the chat want to come in and make their point in a bit more detail, because it is an important one. It does go a little bit perhaps also to the discussion we've had earlier on with Mike. Oh, there's somebody now with their hand up. It's Ant. You have to agree being made into a panelist, and then you can speak.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes.
Yes, you're there. Hello.
Okay. A couple of points really. First of all, I've stuck some quotes up in the chat. Obviously, you can see them for yourself, so I don't have to repeat them. But the basic idea that I think last week somebody said to me that I need to read the Weekly Worker. So I'm going to quote from the Weekly Worker. Yes. We positively advocate the dictatorship, the decisive role of the working class through winning a thumping communist majority in the House of Commons. And I'm going to say that, you've just gone back to Kautsky and the SPD. You've abandoned proletarian democracy. You're taking you're going for some sort of a pure democracy.